The strength of passwords as an authentication control is more important than ever before. Cybercriminals are increasingly using automated password cracking tools to identify passwords in a matter of seconds. For years now, the average user has been given mixed messages about what constitutes a strong password, and to add to the problem, we've struggled with the age-old battle of security versus convenience, and that's often meant that password crackers have had a really easy time of it. Probably the most important and effective way of improving your online security is by ensuring that you've got strong passwords. This lesson will outline the best practices for creating and maintaining the most secure and easy to manage passwords whilst eliminating the bad habits that we all unwittingly have been taught through years of poor password evolution. We'll first take a look at the problem with passwords and then touch on their history and how they've evolved poorly over time. Then we'll cover encryption, password best practices, what makes a good password, using password managers, and why they're the best way to keep your passwords secure and manageable before finally having a look at what an attacker or password cracker does. So let's first try and understand what the problem with passwords is. xkcd.com probably illustrated it best with this cartoon. Here you can see how we've been almost manipulated in a way to create passwords that are more and more complicated but increasingly difficult to remember in an effort to improve security. But because of this trend, over time, these more complex and unmemorable passwords have evolved in a predictable way so that they fall into a common format that's easy to crack. Using predictable words and phrases to crack passwords is called a dictionary attack, and combined with the most common formats in which passwords are created, can still mean that they're cracked with relative ease. Ultimately, it's all about finding the balance between convenience and ensuring that they fulfill their function of authorization security. Making things more secure almost always makes them less user-friendly, more clunky to use, and sometimes frustrating, while the convenience of having hardly anything to do often means there's hardly any security at all. In the end, thieves look for low-hanging fruit, so don't be that low-hanging fruit is really the message here. In the computing world, encryption is the conversion of data from a readable format into an encoded format that can only be read or processed after it's been decrypted. There are many types of encryption out there, and it's not necessary for most people to understand how they work, only that they do work to varying degrees. The MD5 encryption of password 123, for example, can be seen here in its MD5 hash form, just to give you an idea of how it's scrambled and hidden to a potential attacker. A few things here to avoid when dealing with your passwords. Avoid storing passwords in plain text on your device. Don't use your username, real name, birthday, phone number, or any easily identifiable information in your password. Don't use any keyboard combinations like ABCD, or QWERTY, or QAZ. Don't write down your passwords unless you know that they can be put away safely. And don't reuse passwords across sites. If one site is compromised, then every other account that you use that same password for is also unprotected. Good passwords need to have a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, symbols, and numbers. They need to be changed regularly, and they need to be as lengthy as possible whilst remaining memorable. Currently, it's advised to have passwords no shorter than 16 characters long, which is why using passphrases is a more user-friendly option. Using passphrases rather than passwords is a good way to create memorable input that's much harder to crack. Using 25 characters or more dramatically increases the time that it takes to crack. And when used in conjunction with two-factor authentication, it means that even if it is cracked, there's an additional action that needs to be taken to gain access. One of the best ways to have secure passwords but retain a usable level of convenience is to use a password manager. These can store many different complex passwords for you and use encryption to store them in a vault that can only be accessed by a single secure master password.
Passwords are the worst thing that we've ever dreamt up of securing an account. There's so many other pieces of data that can be used to ensure that when you log into something, it's actually you logging in as opposed to a password. Which is why most big providers, people like Google, Microsoft, they don't use passwords anymore. They just get you to put in a password. When you run into these kinds of password issues, it's because people reuse passwords everywhere. I'm going to drop a statistic. I don't know if it's correct. 91%, I think that's actually the statistic, but 91% of people reuse passwords across multiple accounts. And what that means is if one of those accounts gets breached, I use your password everywhere I can think of. I even check on the things that weren't breached to see if your email's on there, and then I'm just going to log into that. The best solution for password management is a password manager. It allows you to secure every password that you own and make sure that every single one of them is unique. So even if one of them gets breached, that password then can't be used on every other piece of service or software that you use anywhere else.
Remember though, just instructing your web browser like Chrome or Edge to do this for you is not good password management, because again, if someone gets into your browser account, they can go to your browser password vault and see every account and its password that you've asked it to store without needing that master password. An attacker or password cracker will firstly try to find credentials from previous data breaches. They'll try and steal password hashes from the Active Directory, and they'll try and use numerous different cracking techniques like the dictionary attack I mentioned earlier to decipher passwords to gain unauthorized access. Closely following the advice in this module will make it all but impossible for them to do this. So in this lesson, we've looked at the current problem with passwords and the difficulty that we have with them. We've discussed encryption briefly, discussed the best practices for creating and managing your passwords, and what password crackers do to compromise them. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next lesson.